Hello everyone, welcome to Gary Mac Studio. The other day I did a little video on just practicing painting these clouds. Well, the more I looked at it, the better I liked it, so I decided to go ahead and add in a foreground, a horizon. And I'm from West Texas, farming community. And all my kin folks were farmers and ranchers, and I worked on those farms a lot. And I've seen many scenes like I'm going to try and depict on this of just cornfield stubbles or wheat field stubbles after the harvest, and it would get a light blanket of snow on them over in late October. And in November, and it'd get this snow down in the furrows of these fields, and they were just beautiful. And we used to walk out through those fields and go quail hunting. And I love quail; they're really good eating. And we used to tread these fields a whole lot, and fill an icebox full of quail. So that's what I'm going to try and do today, is just finish this part of it up. I kind of got a little bit of these furrows sketched in, so we'll just go from there and see how this goes. Hey, you guys, please subscribe to Gary Mac Studio and hit the likes button and and send me a message, reply to me, because these replies is how I put people on the list for a giveaway. And if you've watched my videos, you'll see I've already given away 2 paintings. And so this is how I choose who to give away to, is their interest in my work. And if they're interested in it, I love giving my work away. If they enjoy it and like it, then I'll paint them a picture of one of your choice. So anyway, subscribe, watch, and let's see what happens on this little painting. Let me get you zoomed in here. You can see where I kind of started on this field. So we'll just get going here and see what happens. You know, when I was young, like 8 years old, in that era right there, from 6 to 12 years old, we lived in Amarillo, Texas, and we had a field out behind our house, and Dad had a garden. We had cows and hogs and chickens and turkeys and all that. But Grandma and them, they had a full-blown farm, and there was about 300 acres on their home place. And then they would go out and lease out. They would lease another 2 or 3 sections. Sections is a square mile. So they had lots of farming to do. But on the home place was the main part, and the rest of that they would just they would hire out hired hands to take care of it for them. So on the home place, Grandpa, he asked me one day, and this was about 1955. I was about 7 years old, and he said, "You want to pick some cotton?" Because they had these immigrants come in from Mexico, and they had a bunkhouse built out out by the barn, where they'd house those workers that would come in and to pick cotton. And in the springtime, they'd bring them in, and they would hoe cotton and do all the work of the fields, irrigation and all that. And me and my uncle J.D., he was about 10 years older than I was. He was about 17 or 18 years old at that time. And we'd go out and we'd dig this ditch. The wells were powered by just a V8 car engine with a pump on it, and then they would dig this ditch because the land was so flat up there that the water wouldn't run. So we had to dig a ditch. Had this big old giant plow that they pulled behind the tractor, and it was about, I don't know, 4 or 5 foot wide. And it would dig down, and it had a wheel on top of it that you would turn, and as you go along you would dig deeper and deeper and deeper so the water would tread downhill in the furrow of that ditch. And then the actual furrows of the field, it sloped from the front of where the house was, kind of to the back of the field back there, and then we would take siphon tubes and we would siphon water out of that ditch over into those furrows, and it was quite the process because you had to regulate how many of those tubes. They were like 3-inch tubes. You'd have to regulate how many tubes you could run according to how much water that you pumped out of that well. And you had to go check it pretty often, make sure that you didn't flood over and breach the ditch and all your water run out on the ground. So you had to monitor that pretty often and make sure that you didn't pump it dry where you'd lose your siphon in those tubes, or you didn't siphon out enough water, and it would flood the ditch and breach out the side. So in the springtime, that's what we did, and during the fall time, when it was harvest, the cotton. Well, Grandpa asked me, he says, you want to pick some cotton? And I was like, sure. But those big old cotton sacks that those migrant workers would use they were huge. I don't know, they're probably 10, 12 foot long. I don't know, 4 or 5 foot around. They'd drag that thing behind them and just throw the cotton in them as they pulled it. And I couldn't drag one of those, so Grandma made me a sack out of flour sacks. They bought their flour and stuff in these cotton sacks, and Grandma sewed about 3 or 4 of those together and put a strap on it where I could put it over my shoulder and drag it along with me. And then Grandpa gave me a pair of gloves, and he showed me what to do and how to do it. And those furrows in that one particular field there were probably 3/4 of a mile long, at least a half a mile, but I would say they were longer than that. I don't know. It was a long way. And I could pull 2 rows at a time. I'd walk down the middle of the furrow and pull the ones on the right and pull the ones on the left, where some of those guys that were really good, because they got paid by the row, 10 cents a row, and they'd take 4 rows at a time. Well, they could make 40 cents for every pass they made, and they could go way faster than me, even pulling 4, or some of them would pull 6 lanes. But I pulled 8 lanes that first day, and Grandpa gave me 80 cents. And I thought, man, I'm a rich guy, man. 80 cents would buy a lot of fireworks at the fireworks stand. And back then, that's what I lived for, was them fireworks. And you could buy lots of fireworks for 80 cents. And boy, I was ready to go the next day, except those cotton burrs are really tough. They're really hard, and the edges of them are really sharp, and they just cut your hands all to pieces. And even though I wore gloves, it didn't take long for those things to wear through those gloves onto your hands. And boy, my hands were just, they looked like they'd been through a meat grinder. And there wasn't no way I could pick any more cotton. And then, a year or two later, Grandpa bought a cotton stripper to pull behind the tractor, and they didn't pull cotton by hand anymore. And but they still hold that cotton. They'll hold the weeds out of it. And Grandpa had a bunch of geese, these big old white geese, and they'd clip the wings on those geese where they couldn't fly. They'd clip the feathers off of them. They didn't cut their actual flesh. They just clipped their wings where they couldn't fly. And they'd turn them loose in those fields, and those geese would go down through those furrows, and they'd eat all the grasses and stuff out of that cotton. And they wouldn't touch the cotton plants. They didn't like it, I guess, but they would eat all the weeds and the grasses out of the cotton field. So those geese would actually hold the cotton field. And then if it was really hot, on a really hot day, and those geese, their feet would get hot on the ground, they would just sit down and they wouldn't move. So Grandpa and Daddy and my uncles would take this roof tar, like you put on your roof to waterproof the shingles and stuff, and they would put it on the bottom of those geese's feet and put them in the dirt, and it would make shoes for them so that their feet wouldn't get so hot. And it would just, all of that was just so interesting to me. And taking care of the cattle and the chickens. Grandma always had about 500 head of chickens, of laying hens, and then I'd help her gather the eggs every morning or every afternoon, and we'd wash them and grade them. And to grade those eggs, she had this cone with a light in it, and you'd lay one of those eggs on top of it, and you could see inside that egg to make sure there wasn't any blood streaks, or if they were double yolks, she separated those from the single yolk. And that's the way we graded the eggs, and then they'd stack them up and put them out in a well house where it's cool, and until they got a truckload, a pickup load full, and then they'd take them to market. And they did their pullets the same way. Their chickens that they take to market for processing. And it just, these fields like what I'm showing right now, or what I'm trying to show, these corn stubbles. I remember those, we'd go hunting out in those fields like that, and that snow would kind of melt in the day, and then at nighttime it would freeze over and crust over. And boy, I can still hear myself walking across those fields, how it would crunch under my feet. And it was such a wonderful time in my life of learning how farm animals work, how to take care of them. And I was always wanted to be a farmer, but I just never did get that opportunity. I was too busy doing other stuff. I was a musician, and I wanted to be a rock and roll star. And you know how that goes. Anyway, this little painting, it just brings back a whole lot of memories. And I just love these kind of paintings because it takes me back to a time, and uh, where grandmas and Easter and Christmas and Thanksgiving and all that time. Well, it was a it was a gathering, and not just with family, but all these farmers around. They all come to Grandma's house. Sometimes there'd be 80 or 100 people at a Christmas dinner, and they'd all bring food, pies and cakes, and all the food that we ate was grown right there on the farm. The only time food was bought was when Grandma would go to Plainview, go to town about every 2 or 3 weeks or once a month, and the only thing they would buy would be salt, pepper, and even their flour. They would take wheat out of the bin and take these sacks of wheat to a place there in Plainview called Harvest Grain Mills, and they would take that wheat and mill it into flour. So just about everything, sugar, they bought their sugar, but now their honey, she had, I don't know how many honeybee hives, probably a dozen or more, 15, maybe 20, because those are bees was what would pollinate the fields for, like the cotton and the maize, the sorghum, and everything, like the corn, and then they had an orchard with peaches and apricots and apples and plums and all of that stuff. And Grandma would can it all up, and they had a cellar that they stored it in. It was nice and cool down in that cellar. And I'd been there when I had vicious storms. Tornadoes and all kinds of stuff. So these little paintings right like this one, it's a memorabilia for me, and I just love doing these, especially when it's something like this that applies to my past life. It's just a fun thing. And all you guys, these are acrylics, and it's on a watercolor canvas board. Those acrylics do real good on these watercolor canvas. It's not paper; it's a canvas, but it's a real smooth textured. And then here in just a moment, I'm going to paint in a little farmhouse back up, kind of back over on the horizon, and try and make it homey as I remember it. And there at the barn, they had, my grandma had these turkeys, but the turkeys would run wild around the barnyard. They would just roost anywhere they could, and they had these big stacks of feed shocks out behind the barn, and then they had a shredder where they'd take those feed shocks and grind them up for the cattle feed, and so these turkeys would get up in those feed shocks, and they would hollow out a place up on the sides of them, way up, usually up close to the top. So, and the chickens would too. They had some chickens that would run loose around the barnyard. Not all of them were penned up, because some of them would get out and escape, but they wouldn't run off. They would stay because Grandma, they'd feed them, and those chickens would stay around. We'd go out and gather the eggs, and I'd go to those nests. Well, my Uncle J.D., he says, go up there at the top of this one and get those eggs out of that nest up there. And it's a pretty good way. It's probably 12, 15 foot up there on top of those feed shocks. So I climbed up the side of those feed shocks and I poked my head up there, and there was a darn turkey in there, and grabbed me by the nose and like to twisted my nose off, and then I rolled all the way down those feed shocks. Boy, my uncle, he laughed, and Grandma saw the whole thing. Boy, she got onto him, and he he knew it was a turkey up there before I went up there. And it was just stuff like that went on constantly. I mean, there was always something new and exciting on the farm. I just loved every minute of it. So, you guys that are interested in watching this tutorial, you can see how I went about getting this paint on the canvas. And any of you guys that wanted to follow along, you can grab a canvas and just do as I do. And you can, when you get behind, just slow it down and catch up, and then you can resume. So it's just such a fun thing. I love painting pictures, and I have painted a gang of them. So this part of this painting, it took me probably about an hour. I worked on it about an hour. And then previously, when I did that sky, I probably worked on it about an hour and a half, or maybe 2 hours. I don't remember. But the whole thing don't have 3 hours in it. And I really doubt there'd be 3 hours in the whole painting. And I paint fairly quickly. I've done it so many times. I've painted so many pictures. I kind of know what to expect. But every once in a while, I'll run into a stump that I can't get over, and I'll get frustrated and pull off of it and let it set for a while, and then I'll go back to it. And you guys who've been following me, that big elk painting, I started that one about 8-9 months ago, nearly a year ago, and I'll work on it a little bit and set it aside, and then I'll see something on it, and I'll work on it a little more and go at it again. And so, guys, please subscribe. I'm just about going as far as I'm going to go on this one. And please subscribe, and hit the likes button, and send me a message and get me on that mailing list. And like I say, I've been on this for about 5 months now, and I've given away 2 paintings already. So here's the end product, and I'm gone. And I love y'all, and we will catch you on the next one. Bye bye.